The night was electric with laughter and the clinking of glasses as guests filled the grand ballroom of a mansion perched on a hilltop. The millionaire, a man known for his extravagant lifestyle and immense wealth, was hosting yet another lavish gathering, filled with celebrities, business magnates, and other influential individuals. Everything about the night screamed luxury, from the glimmering chandeliers to the perfect, crystal-clear wine glasses. The guests were immersed in conversation, talking about investments, business deals, and the latest trends. At the center of the room stood the millionaire, smiling and shaking hands with everyone. His polished appearance and commanding presence made him the focal point of the night. His reputation was impeccable, a man of power, success, and social charm. He had it all: money, fame, and the admiration of those around him. But behind the veneer of this perfect evening, something else was stirring. Among the sea of unfamiliar faces, one person stood out: his elderly mother. She was a quiet, graceful woman, far removed from the high-energy atmosphere of the gathering. Unlike the flashy crowd, she wore a simple dress, her silver hair neatly pinned up. Her presence was soft, almost unnoticed by many, but she was part of the millionaire's life, and he had invited her to join the party that evening. She had been there for him through everything, from the time he was a child to his rise to wealth. But there was something about her quiet demeanor tonight that caught the attention of a few guests. As the night wore on, things began to change. There was an uncomfortable tension building in the air. The millionaire's eyes, once warm and welcoming, grew cold as he noticed his mother quietly sitting alone by the large windows. His patience, which was usually boundless, seemed to be thinning, and a sense of irritation was starting to show. The night that had started with laughter and joy quickly took a turn. He walked over to her, his face tight with anger. His mother, who had been seated, looked up in surprise. She had no idea what was about to happen. She tried to smile, but her son's frown deepened as he glared at her. She asked him something, her voice soft, but it seemed to irritate him even more. His anger quickly escalated, and the guests, sensing something was wrong, began to watch quietly. In the middle of the conversation, as if unable to control his temper, the millionaire raised his hand and slapped his elderly mother. The sound echoed throughout the room, sending a ripple of shock through the guests. A gasp could be heard from the crowd, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. No one moved. No one dared to speak. The moment was so shocking that everyone stood in disbelief, unsure of how to react. The mother's eyes welled up with tears, and she turned her face away, humiliated in front of a crowd of strangers. The guests whispered among themselves, some unsure of what they had just witnessed, others completely appalled. The millionaire's face was a mixture of anger and something else, perhaps regret, but it didn't show. His eyes, which had always been so confident, now looked unsure. His actions had left a stain on the evening, and no one could ignore what had just happened. It was a moment that no one would forget, a moment that would change everything for the millionaire, his family, and everyone who had witnessed it. As the millionaire's mother quietly withdrew to another room, trying to regain her composure, the atmosphere in the mansion shifted. The guests, still reeling from the shocking scene, murmured among themselves, unsure of how to react. The laughter and conversation that once filled the room slowly faded into uncomfortable silence. It was as if the energy had been drained from the gathering, and even the most important business deals seemed trivial compared to what had just transpired. But amidst the crowd, there was one person who had not joined in the whispers. One guest, who had been standing near the door, had seen the entire exchange clearly. This person had been quietly observing, blending in with the crowd, unnoticed by most. The witness was not someone anyone would remember easily. They had come to the party not for the glamour or the luxury, but for a different reason entirely. This guest had a personal connection to the millionaire's family, though it wasn't immediately apparent to anyone in the room. In fact, no one knew the full extent of the connection. They had been watching the millionaire's rise to wealth for years, following the public success, but also aware of the darker, quieter aspects of his life. The witness had seen and experienced things that others had not. And now, with the slap echoing in their mind, they couldn't help but feel a sense of justice that had been long overdue. Though the millionaire might have seen the party as just another event to show off his wealth, to this quiet guest it was an opportunity. They had been waiting for a chance like this, a moment when the millionaire's true nature could no longer be hidden behind his wealth and charm. And now, in front of the entire gathering, the man had exposed himself. The slap was not just an act of anger. It was a reflection of the cruel treatment his mother had endured for years. This was the moment the witness had been waiting for. The guest's mind began to work quickly. They didn't want to act hastily, but they couldn't let this moment slip by unnoticed. The incident was powerful enough to turn the millionaire's perfect image upside down, and the witness knew that. They had spent years quietly gathering information about the millionaire, piecing together a narrative of abuse that few knew. Tonight, they had seen the final piece fall into place. But the witness was not ready to reveal themselves just yet. They remained in the shadows, careful not to attract attention. They knew that this moment, this shocking revelation, would be their opportunity to expose the millionaire for what he truly was. For now, they had to gather their thoughts and wait for the right time. It wasn't just about the slap. It was about everything that had led to this moment. And the witness was determined to make sure that this truth would not remain hidden any longer. The aftermath of the incident was heavy, and the mansion, once alive with energy, now felt eerily quiet. The guests, still processing what had just happened, awkwardly returned to their conversations, but the joy that had once filled the room was gone. Some tried to pretend that nothing had occurred, while others couldn't help but exchange glances, unsure of how to address the elephant in the room. No one could shake the image of the slap, a moment that would linger in their minds for a long time. As the minutes passed, a sense of discomfort filled the air. The millionaire's mother had retreated to a private room, her fragile heart no doubt broken by the public display of anger from her son. She had been silent for most of the evening, watching from the sidelines as her son basked in the attention of his guests. Her presence was often overlooked, as she was never one to seek the spotlight. But now she was alone, her emotions hidden behind closed doors. The millionaire, too, seemed to retreat within himself. Though outwardly calm, his eyes betrayed a mix of anger and uncertainty. The pride he once carried so easily was now weighed down by the consequences of his actions. The room was buzzing with low whispers as people began to process the shocking event they had just witnessed. What could have caused such an outburst? Was there something more to the millionaire than met the eye? For many of the guests, it was difficult to reconcile the charming businessman they had known with the man who had just displayed such cruelty. Some guests tried to reach out to the millionaire, offering words of comfort or support, but he waved them away. His mind seemed elsewhere, his thoughts undoubtedly focused on the repercussions of his actions. The public persona he had carefully built over the years, the one that portrayed him as a loving and successful man, now seemed fragile and easily shattered. The power he had once wielded with ease seemed to slip through his fingers. But it wasn't just the millionaire who was affected. The people around him, those who had once admired him, began to question their own perceptions of him. How could they have missed the signs? Had he always been this way? The trust they had placed in him now felt misplaced, and the atmosphere in the mansion became filled with uncertainty. As the evening wore on, the millionaire's actions were still the topic of conversation. Some guests whispered behind closed doors, wondering if they should leave, while others stayed glued to their seats, unable to look away from the unfolding drama. The millionaire's once invincible reputation was now in tatters, and there was no telling what would happen next. Would he try to salvage his public image? Or would the consequences of his actions come crashing down on him in ways he hadn't anticipated? The night, which had started with promises of success and luxury, now seemed like a distant memory. The slap had changed everything, and the guests were left to wonder if they would ever view the millionaire the same way again. The quiet guest who had witnessed the shocking event was far from a stranger to the millionaire's world. In fact, this person's history with the family stretched back many years, though it was known to few. They had seen the millionaire grow from an ambitious young man into a powerful figure, and over time, they had grown more aware of the darker, less visible aspects of his personality. The slap was not just a random act of anger. It was the final straw in a long line of mistreatment that the millionaire's mother had endured for years. This quiet guest had always kept to the shadows, observing from a distance and gathering information. They had been carefully watching the millionaire for some time, knowing that one day the truth would need to come to light. The evening had provided the perfect opportunity to finally act, to expose the millionaire's true nature for the world to see. But the guests didn't act immediately. They had to be careful. For years, they had stayed away from the family's drama, quietly collecting information without drawing attention to themselves. They had heard the rumors, the whispers of how the millionaire treated his mother behind closed doors, how he had used his wealth and power to control and manipulate the people around him. But none of that had ever been publicly known. Now, with the slap echoing in their mind, the guest knew it was time to make their move. While everyone else remained in shock, pretending to return to their conversations, the guest took a step back, quietly thinking through their next move. They had been collecting pieces of the puzzle for years, small details, conversations, hidden moments, and now they had everything they needed. The millionaire's public image was carefully crafted, but the cracks in that image had been growing for a long time. The slap had simply revealed what was always lurking beneath the surface. The guest knew they couldn't just expose everything at once. The world needed to see the full picture, the millionaire's cruelty, his treatment of his mother, and the dark truths that had been hidden from the public eye for so long. The slap was only the beginning. Now the guest would have to be strategic, waiting for the perfect moment to share the story they had been quietly building. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about giving the world the truth. For now, they stayed hidden, watching the millionaire's every move. They could see the tension in his face, the frustration in his eyes as he tried to maintain his composure. The millionaire had no idea who was watching him, who had seen his outburst, or that someone in the room knew the full extent of his actions. It was clear that the truth was about to come to light, and the guest couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction in knowing that the millionaire's carefully constructed life was beginning to unravel. In the days that followed, the guest would continue to gather more information, making sure they were prepared for what would come next. They knew they would need evidence, something concrete to show the world. It wasn't enough to simply tell the story. The truth had to be undeniable. They were patient, waiting for the right time to bring everything to the surface. The millionaire's life, and the truth about his relationship with his mother, was about to be exposed in ways no one could have predicted. The quiet guest, having carefully observed the millionaire and his family for so long, was now ready to reveal the truth. They had collected bits and pieces of information over the years, small, seemingly insignificant moments that painted a bigger picture of the millionaire's character. The slap, though shocking, was just the tipping point, the moment everything came to the surface. The guest knew that the world needed to see this for what it truly was, a pattern of behavior that could no longer be ignored. With the millionaire's outburst fresh in their mind, the guest decided it was time to act. They had been quietly gathering evidence, documenting the things others had missed. The slap was a public moment, but it was only one piece of the puzzle. The guest knew that in order to expose the millionaire's true nature, they needed more, something that would force the world to see the man behind the polished image. They needed something undeniable, something that would leave no room for doubt. The guest's plan was simple but effective. They would use the evidence they had gathered to create a compelling narrative, a story that would make people question everything they thought they knew about the millionaire. The first step was to ensure that the video of the slap was widely shared. It had been recorded by a hidden camera during the party, and the moment had been captured clearly for all to see. The video was shocking enough on its own, but it wasn't enough to tell the whole story. The guest knew they had to build upon it, adding layers of context to reveal the bigger picture. As the video spread, the guest quietly contacted a few trusted individuals, journalists and bloggers who had the reach and influence to spread the story further. They shared the footage, along with detailed accounts of the millionaire's history of mistreating his mother. Slowly, the story began to take shape. What had initially been a shocking, isolated incident was now part of a larger pattern of behavior, one that revealed the millionaire's true character. The public began to take notice, and soon the millionaire's once untouchable reputation began to crumble. At first, the millionaire tried to dismiss the video, calling it a misunderstanding, an isolated incident. He couldn't deny the evidence, but he attempted to downplay its significance. He issued public apologies, claiming that his actions were out of character and that he was deeply sorry for what had happened. But the damage had already been done. The more he tried to cover it up, the more people began to question his sincerity. The truth, once exposed, couldn't be easily retracted. The millionaire's carefully crafted public image had been shattered. The guest, still watching from the sidelines, could see the millionaire's desperation. His empire, built on wealth and influence, was now at risk. His public relations team scrambled to control the fallout, but it was clear that no amount of money or charm could undo the damage. The millionaire's past actions, once hidden behind closed doors, were now out in the open for the world to see. The guest had succeeded in what they had set out to do, exposing the truth, piece by piece, until there was no turning back. The aftermath of the video's release was nothing short of chaotic. The millionaire faced criticism from all corners: business partners, media outlets, and even his own family. The public was outraged, and the pressure mounted. The guest had successfully taken down the millionaire's carefully constructed empire, and in doing so, they had also given a voice to the one person who had been silenced for so long: the millionaire's mother. She was no longer just a figure in the background. She was now a symbol of the truth that had been buried for years. As the story spread, the millionaire's empire continued to crumble. His wealth and status, once so important to him, now felt hollow in the face of his exposed cruelty. The guest, having orchestrated the downfall, quietly watched as the pieces fell into place. The truth had been revealed, and there was no turning back for the millionaire. His world, once so carefully controlled, had been turned upside down, and the guest couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. They had exposed the truth, and nothing would ever be the same again. The fallout from the slap was swift and intense. The video, once shared, spread like wildfire. Social media platforms buzzed with outrage, and the story quickly gained traction across news outlets. The millionaire, once a man of power and influence, found himself caught in a storm he had never anticipated. His phone rang constantly, reporters and journalists demanding answers. Friends and colleagues who had once admired him began to distance themselves, unsure how to reconcile the man they had known with the person they had just seen in the video. The shock of the moment left him scrambling for control over the narrative. At first, the millionaire tried to maintain his composure. He issued a statement to the media, offering an apology and explaining that the incident was a momentary lapse in judgment. He claimed that the pressures of his busy life had gotten the best of him, and that his actions didn't reflect his true character. He expressed regret over what had happened and vowed to seek help, as though that would be enough to smooth over the storm. But his words fell flat. The public wasn't buying it. The video spoke louder than any apology. People began to question his sincerity. The more he tried to explain, the more suspicious they became. What had happened to the man who had always been the image of success and charisma? Could he really be the same person who had just slapped his own mother in front of an entire room of guests? It was a question that lingered in the air, and no amount of damage control could erase the image of that single cruel moment. As the media coverage intensified, the millionaire's wealth and power began to feel insignificant. He was no longer the invincible businessman he had once been. Instead, he was a man whose actions had been exposed for the world to see. His once solid reputation crumbled, piece by piece, as the stories of his past began to surface. People started to dig into his history, uncovering other instances where he had shown a lack of empathy, where his arrogance had overshadowed any sense of decency. The millionaire's attempts to restore his image through interviews and public appearances only made things worse. His frustration grew as he realized that no amount of wealth or status could fix the damage that had been done. He couldn't escape the consequences of his actions, no matter how much he tried to manipulate the narrative. His supporters began to fade away, realizing that they had been blind to the truth all along. The image of the successful, compassionate man they had admired was replaced by something far less admirable. Meanwhile, the millionaire's mother, once a figure in the background, emerged as the voice of reason in the storm. She gave interviews where she spoke openly about her son's treatment of her over the years. Her words carried weight, and they painted a picture of a relationship that had been damaged by years of neglect and control. No longer afraid of her son's power, she shared the truth that many had never known. The millionaire had always been a man who valued success above all else, and his family had suffered for it. The media, now focusing on the mother's side of the story, began to paint a more complete picture of the millionaire. The public's sympathy shifted, and what had been a story of one momentary lapse in judgment became the tale of a much deeper, ongoing problem. The millionaire's reputation was shattered beyond repair, and his business empire started to feel the effects. Investors pulled away, business deals fell through, and his network of influential contacts began to shrink. He was no longer the man people wanted to do business with. As the weeks passed, the millionaire's world continued to unravel. The truth that had been hidden for so long was now out in the open, and there was no going back. The more he tried to repair his image, the more the truth seemed to chase him, leaving him with nothing but the fallout of his own actions. As the media frenzy surrounding the millionaire continued, his world began to fracture in ways he hadn't anticipated. His business dealings, once lucrative and stable, were now filled with doubt. Potential investors were pulling back, and high-profile contracts that had once been secured with ease began to slip through his fingers. No amount of wealth or charm could undo the damage to his reputation. The respect and admiration he had built over the years were quickly replaced with skepticism and distrust. The millionaire, who had once held all the cards, was now scrambling to maintain his standing. Meanwhile, his elderly mother, who had once been sidelined in the background of his lavish life, was finding her voice. The public attention on the incident had brought forth her side of the story, a side that had remained hidden for years. For too long, she had kept her struggles to herself, too afraid to speak out against her powerful son. But now, with the world watching, she felt a sense of liberation. She no longer had to remain silent. In interviews and public appearances, the mother began to share her experiences. She spoke of the years she had spent in the shadows of her son's rise to power, how her needs and feelings were ignored in favor of his ambitions. She described the emotional toll of living with someone who seemed to care only about his image and success, never taking the time to nurture the bond between mother and son. For the first time, people were listening to her. The millionaire's mask was slipping, and the public began to see the truth. They realized that the slap was just one piece of a much larger, deeply troubling picture. The more the millionaire's mother spoke, the more her story resonated with the public. Her strength and courage inspired others who had suffered in silence, and soon she was seen as a symbol of resilience. The mother, once dismissed as an elderly woman who lived quietly in the background, had become a voice for the overlooked and unheard. Her words were powerful, and they made people question everything they had assumed about the millionaire's life. On the other hand, the millionaire's attempts to rebuild his empire were faltering. His business partners, once eager to align with him, were now hesitant. They feared the backlash of being associated with him, knowing that the public perception of him was irreparably damaged. Even his closest friends began to pull away, unsure of how to handle the situation. The millionaire found himself isolated, surrounded only by his own failure. He had lost the trust of those who had once admired him, and his wealth, which had always been his safety net, now seemed like a hollow victory. The public's sympathy had shifted. Where they had once celebrated the millionaire's success, they now empathized with his mother. The spotlight had shifted from the powerful businessman to the woman who had been hurt, ignored, and overshadowed for so long. The contrast between their two lives was striking. While the millionaire had chased wealth and power, his mother had sought nothing more than love and respect, a respect that had been denied to her by the very person she had raised. In the months that followed, the millionaire tried to salvage what he could of his legacy, but it was clear that things would never be the same. His empire was crumbling, and there was no way to put the pieces back together. As his mother's voice grew louder, the millionaire's world continued to collapse around him. The public had seen the truth, and no amount of money or fame could undo the damage that had been done. The millionaire had become a cautionary tale, and his mother, a symbol of strength in the face of adversity. As the millionaire watched everything he had built crumble, he was forced to confront the reality of his actions. The damage was done, and there was no going back. His relationship with his mother, which had once been so distant, would never be the same again. But for the first time in years, the mother found herself free from the shadows. Her voice was heard, and the truth had come to light. The millionaire could no longer control the narrative. It was a moment of reckoning, and in the end, it was his mother who came out stronger, having found the courage to speak out and reclaim her voice. As time passed, the millionaire found himself in a position he had never imagined possible. The empire he had worked so hard to build was slowly slipping away from him. The media that had once praised him now turned its gaze on his fall from grace, amplifying every mistake and every failure. His business deals that had once seemed secure were now unraveling, with partners backing out and clients canceling contracts. His reputation, carefully cultivated over years, had been shattered by one moment of reckless anger. And in the midst of all this, the millionaire was left to face the harsh truth. His actions had consequences far beyond what he could have ever anticipated. The millionaire's mother, on the other hand, found herself in a new chapter of her life, one that was filled with unexpected strength and empowerment. The public had rallied behind her, offering support and admiration for her bravery in speaking out about her difficult relationship with her son. Her words resonated with many who had endured similar struggles, and she became a symbol of resilience. The love and respect she had long been denied were now being offered to her in abundance. People listened to her story and understood that there was far more to her than just being the quiet, elderly mother of a powerful man. She began to use her newfound platform to speak about issues she had once kept quiet. Her experience with her son had taught her the importance of standing up for herself, and she now wanted to help others who had been silenced. She advocated for those who had suffered in the shadows, reminding them that their voices mattered and that they deserved to be heard. Her words inspired many, and she was often invited to share her story in public forums, where she became a beloved figure of courage and wisdom. While the millionaire continued to struggle with his tarnished image, the mother began to rebuild her own life in ways she had never expected. No longer bound by the expectations of others or the control of her son, she found freedom in speaking her truth. She had reclaimed her dignity, and in doing so, she had gained something far more precious than wealth. She had regained her self-respect and the respect of the public. The millionaire, meanwhile, could only watch as his life continued to spiral. His attempts to repair his damaged reputation were futile, and the more he tried to explain himself, the more the public seemed to distance themselves from him. The apology tours and interviews only seemed to make things worse, and it became increasingly clear that the damage he had caused was irreversible. The world no longer saw him as the successful businessman he once was. They saw him for what he had truly become, a man who had treated his own mother with cruelty and disregard. His wealth and influence, once symbols of power, now seemed insignificant in the face of the truth. As the months went by, the millionaire's empire continued to shrink. He had lost the trust of those around him, and the public no longer had any faith in him. His businesses, which had once been thriving, were now faltering, and his personal life was in shambles. The people who had once admired him now saw him as a cautionary tale, a warning about the dangers of unchecked power and a lack of empathy. The millionaire had come to realize, too late, that no amount of money or success could protect him from the consequences of his actions. In the end, the millionaire's downfall was a direct result of his own choices. His inability to control his anger, his disregard for his mother, and his sense of entitlement had led to a series of events that had destroyed everything he had worked for. And while he was left to pick up the pieces of his shattered life, his mother stood strong, a woman who had found her voice and her power once again. She had lost nothing that truly mattered and gained everything in the process. Her journey, one of pain and silence, had turned into a story of triumph. She had found the courage to speak out, and in doing so, she had changed her life and the lives of others forever. The millionaire's empire had crumbled, but the mother had emerged from the ashes stronger than ever. And as the world turned its attention to her, she knew that she had finally found the respect and love that had always been hers to claim.